The weather-worn backpack was discovered by a hiker on April 12, 2023, partially buried beneath fallen pine needles in the remote eastern section of Olympic National Forest, Washington. What made this discovery significant wasn't the backpack itself, a standard-issue REI wilderness pack, but the driver's license inside. The ID belonged to Marcus Devereaux, a 32-year-old forestry consultant who had vanished without a trace while conducting a routine survey in these same woods on October 3, 2013. Detective Elaine Harmon, now nearing retirement from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, received the call about the backpack discovery with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. She had been the lead investigator on the Devereaux case a decade earlier, one of the most perplexing disappearances in the department's history. When you work in law enforcement long enough near vast wilderness areas like Olympic, you understand that sometimes people just vanish, Harmon explains, her weathered hands carefully examining the backpack in the evidence room. But something about Marcus's case never sat right. His vehicle was found properly parked at a designated trailhead. His satellite phone showed no outgoing calls after 2:14 p.m. on the day he disappeared. The search teams found absolutely nothing, not a footprint, not a trace. The original investigation had been extensive. Over 200 volunteers combed 18 square miles of dense forest for 16 days. Cadaver dogs, thermal imaging drones, and helicopters yielded no results. Marcus Devereaux had seemingly stepped off the face of the earth. Forensic analysis of the recently discovered backpack revealed something odd. While exposed to the elements, the wear patterns suggested it hadn't been sitting in that location for 10 years. Soil compression and vegetation growth underneath indicated placement within the last 6 to 18 months. Inside, investigators found Marcus's wallet, credentials, a notebook filled with forestry observations dated October 3, 2013, and a digital camera with a dead battery. The notebook entries stopped mid-sentence, explains forensic document examiner Dr. Leah Chen. The final entry reads, "Unusual structure approximately 500 meters northwest of marking point D7. Man-made but doesn't match any logging or ranger stations on my maps. Going to investigate and then..." That's where it ends. The camera, once charged, revealed 47 photographs from Marcus's final day, mostly routine shots of tree growth, soil samples, and landscape features. The last 3 images, however, captured what appeared to be a distant cabin or small structure partially obscured by trees. The GPS metadata placed these final photographs approximately 7.2 miles from where Marcus's truck had been parked. "We never found any structure in that area during the original search," says former search coordinator Thomas Reeves. The coordinates put it in an extremely steep section of ravine that had been deemed too dangerous for ground teams. We did flyovers with thermal imaging, but detected no heat signatures. The Devereaux family had never accepted the prevailing theory that Marcus had fallen victim to the wilderness, a fatal accident in terrain so rugged that recovery was impossible. His father, retired Coast Guard officer Richard Devereaux, had maintained a private search for years after the official efforts ceased. "Marcus knew those forests better than anyone," Richard insists, his voice steady despite the decade of uncertainty. "He wouldn't have gotten lost or taken unnecessary risks. Something or someone else was involved." The case had gone cold until 3 weeks after the backpack discovery, when a man walked into a gas station convenience store in the small town of Forks, Washington, appearing disoriented and asking to use a phone. The store clerk, unnerved by the man's appearance, gaunt, with a wild beard and homemade clothing, called local police. When officers arrived, the man identified himself as Marcus Devereaux. DNA testing and fingerprint analysis later confirmed his identity, though the man was physically transformed from the forestry consultant who had disappeared a decade earlier. 40 pounds lighter, with prematurely greyed hair and unusual scarring on his hands and forearms, this was indeed Marcus Devereux, somehow returned from whatever fate had claimed him 10 years earlier. "I lived with other people," was all he would say initially to the responding officers. "They found me. They took me in." Psychiatric evaluation at Olympic Medical Center revealed no signs of psychosis or delusional thinking. But Marcus displayed symptoms consistent with long-term isolation and integration into an unfamiliar social environment. His speech patterns included unusual syntax and vocabulary shifts. He struggled with modern technology and appeared genuinely shocked by political and cultural developments of the past decade. In cases of reappearance after prolonged absence, we typically see two scenarios, explains Dr. Samantha West, the forensic psychologist assigned to Marcus's case. Either the individual was held against their will, or they chose to disappear. Marcus presents an unusual third possibility. He seems to genuinely believe he was living with a community of people deep within the Olympic wilderness, but his account contains significant inconsistencies and gaps. When interviewed by Detective Harmon, Marcus described being injured during his forest survey, a fall down a steep ravine that left him with a broken leg and unable to move. According to his fragmented account, he was found by individuals he consistently refers to only as the others, or those people who brought him to their settlement. The way he describes this community is methodical but vague, notes Harmon. He talks about structures built into hillsides, gardens in clearings, and a group of approximately 30 individuals. But he can't or won't provide names, clear locations, or explain why they have no contact with the outside world. Cell phone triangulation data from 2013, recently reanalyzed with advanced software, placed Marcus's last known location in an area never properly searched during the original investigation. Historical satellite imagery from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency revealed something previously unnoticed. A small clearing approximately 9.7 miles from the parking area where Marcus left his vehicle, with what appears to be cultivated land in a region officially designated as uninhabited wilderness. Discrepancies in Marcus's account raised red flags for investigators. He described technologies the community used that seemed improvised yet sophisticated: water filtration systems, food preservation techniques, and medical treatments that didn't align with either primitive survival methods or modern practices. When pressed about why he never attempted to leave or contact his family, Marcus became agitated. They said it wasn't safe," he repeated during his third interview. "They explained why I couldn't go back, but now I don't remember the reasons clearly. It made sense then." Richard Devereux's reaction to his son's return was complex. "I never stopped believing he was alive," he says, his eyes fixed on middle distance. "But the man who came back, there are moments when I'm not sure he's entirely my son anymore." Marcus's ex-fiancée, wildlife biologist Elena Cortez, had moved on after years of uncertainty, eventually marrying and relocating to Colorado. Upon learning of Marcus's reappearance, she offered insights into his mental state before the disappearance. Marcus had become increasingly interested in self-sufficient communities, Cortez reveals. He'd been researching historical accounts of people who had chosen to live outside conventional society, but he never mentioned wanting to join such a group himself. "In fact, we were planning our wedding for the following spring." The investigation took another turn when forensic analysis of Marcus's blood revealed unusual biochemical markers, elevated levels of certain nutrients consistent with a highly specialized diet, along with traces of an unidentified compound that resembled known natural sedatives derived from forest fungal species, but with a molecular structure not catalogued in scientific databases. Indeed, whatever environment Mr. Devereaux was living in for the past decade, his physiological adaptations are significant, states Dr. Raymond Chen, toxicologist. These changes couldn't occur from standard wilderness survival. His system shows signs of long-term exposure to a unique nutritional and possibly pharmacological regimen. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Department assembled a specialized task force to investigate Marcus's claims, combining local officers with experts from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and the National Park Service. A series of expeditions into the Olympic National Forest, guided by Marcus's fragmented descriptions and the satellite imagery, yielded troubling results. We located what appears to be an abandoned settlement approximately 10.4 miles from the original search perimeter, reports Park Ranger Catherine Miller. Matilde. The structures were partially dismantled, with clear evidence of recent activity, fire pits with ash still containing traces of heat, cultivation areas with freshly harvested plants, and a sophisticated water collection system, unlike anything we typically see in wilderness survivalist camps. Forensic teams documented the site extensively. 7 semi-permanent structures had been built using a combination of natural materials and repurposed items. The construction methods displayed both primitive techniques and surprisingly advanced engineering principles. Most striking was the careful concealment. The settlement had been deliberately designed to remain undetectable from aerial surveys, with canopies of native vegetation creating natural camouflage. Whoever built this place understood how to remain hidden, notes FBI Special Agent Marcus Torres. The structures were positioned to avoid creating shadows detectable in satellite imagery. The smoke from their fires was filtered through a series of underground chambers that dispersed heat signatures. This wasn't improvised. This was methodical. DNA analysis from the site recovered samples from an estimated 22 to 28 distinct individuals, none matching any profiles in national databases. Material evidence suggested the community had departed hurriedly within days of Marcus's reappearance in civilization. Among the items recovered were hand-bound journals written in an unidentified alphanumeric code, botanical specimens preserved in handmade containers, and primitive communication devices fashioned from modified electronic components that appeared to be decades old. Marcus's reaction to photographs of the settlement was revealing. "That's not right," he insisted, visibly distressed. "The buildings were different, there were more of them, and they weren't above ground like this." When pressed for clarification, he became disoriented, unable to provide consistent details. Psychological assessment indicated Marcus was not fabricating his experiences intentionally. We're seeing evidence of memory compartmentalization consistent with prolonged psychological conditioning, explains Dr. West. It's similar to patterns we observe in isolated religious communities or certain historical cases of cultural indoctrination. Marcus believes what he's telling us, but his memories appear to have been systematically altered. The investigation uncovered another significant lead when forensic accountants traced unusual financial activity connected to Marcus's disappearance. In the months preceding October 2013, 3 substantial withdrawals totaling $47,000 had been made from his savings account. The funds were converted to cashier's checks made out to an entity called Autonomous Research Collective, which had no official business registration or digital footprint. Elaine Harmon's team discovered a connection between this entity and Dr. James Whitaker, a former environmental scientist who had resigned from the University of Washington in 2010 following controversies surrounding his radical theories on sustainable human habitation. Whitaker had published several papers proposing that conventional society was fundamentally unsustainable and advocating for the establishment of self-sufficient micro-communities operating outside mainstream economic and social systems. Whitaker disappeared from academic circles around 2011. explains journalist Diane Powell, who had reported on controversial scientific movements. There were rumors he was recruiting like-minded individuals, researchers, engineers, environmental specialists, to participate in what he called practical research into post-industrial human adaptation. He specifically targeted people with wilderness expertise and technical knowledge. A search of Marcus's cloud storage accounts, untouched since 2013, revealed email correspondence with an individual using the alias Jade Budubu Autonomy. The messages discussed practical implementation of theoretical frameworks and referenced a community-based study with a minimum 10-year observation period. The final email, dated September 29, 2013, contained only geographic coordinates, corresponding almost exactly to the area where Marcus disappeared 4 days later. When confronted with this evidence, Marcus experienced what his doctors described as a cognitive break, a sudden fracturing of his constructed narrative. It wasn't supposed to end yet, he stated during a recorded interview session. The study parameters required complete isolation. 10 years was the minimum baseline. Something must have gone wrong with the protocol. The investigation determined that Marcus had likely joined Whitaker's experimental community voluntarily, though the nature of his continued participation remained unclear. The community appeared to have been conducting a long-term isolation experiment, combining anthropological research with practical testing of sustainable living theories. The unusual chemical compounds in Marcus's system suggested the group may have been using naturally derived psychoactive substances, possibly to facilitate community cohesion or manage stress in isolation. We believe Marcus initially joined this community willingly, Detective Harmon concludes, but the evidence suggests the nature of the experiment changed over time. The psychological conditioning, chemical interventions, and strict isolation protocols point to methods that cross ethical boundaries. At some point, this shifted from voluntary participation to something more controlling. The most disturbing evidence came from Marcus himself, as his compartmentalized memories gradually became more accessible during therapeutic sessions. He described regular integration protocols, community rituals involving ingestion of prepared substances followed by group recitation of shared principles. He recalled periods of time, sometimes days, spent in underground chambers for what the community leaders called perceptual recalibration. They told us the outside world was experiencing cascading system failures. Marcus explained in a particularly lucid session: environmental collapse, social fragmentation, resource depletion. The news we received was carefully selected to reinforce this narrative. We were preparing for a transition, preserving knowledge and developing adaptation strategies for when broader society could no longer function. 6 months into the investigation, a breakthrough occurred when a forest maintenance worker discovered a cache of waterproof containers concealed in a hollow tree approximately 3 miles from the abandoned settlement. The containers held digital storage devices, including USB drives and hardened portable servers, containing what appeared to be research data, detailed documentation of the community's activities spanning nearly 11 years. The files revealed the community called itself Continuity Enclave Alpha, one of 3 planned experimental sites established by Whitaker and his associates. The stated research objective was to document the psychological, physiological, and social adaptations necessary for successful human transition to post-industrial sustainable existence. The data included detailed medical records, psychological evaluations, and productivity metrics for each community member, including Marcus. Perhaps most revealing were video logs recorded by Whitaker himself, documenting the evolution of the experiment. In later entries, his demeanor changed markedly from scientific objectivity to increasing paranoia. External contamination threatens the validity of our data, he stated in an entry dated June 2022. Participant autonomy must be subordinated to protocol integrity. Memory management procedures will be intensified. The final video, dated just weeks before Marcus's reappearance, showed Whitaker addressing the community. Observation. Phase 1 concludes in 73 days. Preparation for community dissolution and data preservation must now commence. Designated memory custodians will receive their assignments individually. The investigation concluded that Marcus had been selected as a memory custodian, someone deliberately allowed to return to society carrying specific recollections that had been carefully constructed. His reappearance was not an escape, but a planned release, though evidence suggested he had broken from the intended narrative protocol once separated from the community's influence. As for the other community members and Whitaker himself, their whereabouts remain unknown. FBI analysts believe the group likely had contingency locations prepared and may have redistributed to secondary sites. Forensic accounting has identified similar patterns of recruitment and resource acquisition possibly connected to Whitaker, occurring in remote regions of British Columbia, northern Maine, and central Idaho. Marcus Devereaux continues to undergo therapy and reintegration assistance. His recovery is complicated by the fundamental question of consent, whether his initial agreement to join the community constitutes informed consent for everything that followed. The psychological conditioning he experienced has left lasting impacts on his perception and memory function. The most difficult part is not knowing what's real, Marcus admits in his final interview for this investigation. I lived for a decade with absolute certainty about why we were there and what we were doing. Now I question everything, even my own motivation for joining them in the first place. Richard Devereaux has established a foundation to support victims of psychological manipulation and those reintegrating after long-term separation from society. My son is back physically, but the person he was, the Marcus I knew, may never fully return, he says. These groups target idealistic people who want to make a difference. They take that idealism and twist it into something unrecognizable. The Olympic National Forest case remains technically open, with periodic searches continuing for the remaining community members. Detective Harmon, who postponed her retirement to see the investigation through, offers a sobering assessment. This isn't just about one missing person anymore. This is about understanding how easily human perception can be manipulated when isolation, authority, and psychological techniques converge. The wilderness didn't take Marcus Devereaux. People with an agenda did. The recovery of Marcus Devereaux raises troubling questions about the boundaries between scientific research, cult-like manipulation, and consent. In the vast wilderness of Olympic National Forest, a community vanished just as mysteriously as it had existed, leaving behind one man carrying fragments of an experiment that consumed a decade of his life, and an investigation that may never fully uncover the truth of what happened in those remote woods.